placed inside a metal barrel, tied, surrounded by gasoline, ready to be burned alive. This was the fate of the man who dared to betray one of Mexico's most dangerous cartels. He gave away names, gave away routes, revealed secrets that should never have come out. Sinaloa. And for that, he paid the price. What happened inside that warehouse remained silent, but the war that began then plunged the cartel into blood. Sit back, put on your headphones, and get ready to hear the real story that no news program had the courage to tell. For years, he was just one of many. A quiet face, a name that didn't attract attention. Someone who knew the inner workings of the Sinaloa Cartel, but who never made headlines or appeared on police radios. His name was Javier Galindo, and to those who knew him, he was just a trusted operative, a link between the group's internal communications and the logistics that moved weapons, money, and information between Culiacan, Tijuana, and Nogales. He didn't pull the trigger. He didn't appear on video. He was the kind of man who knew too much and said too little. But at the end of 2024, Javier crossed an invisible line, a line that no one goes back to once they step on. What few people knew was that he had started to pass on confidential information. The origin of the data was never confirmed, but it is believed that he handed over routes, identities, movements, and even entire agendas with meeting dates. What he received in return was also never discovered. Some say it was money. Others say he just wanted to get out alive with his family. But what matters is that the names he exposed were too heavy. Among them were two pillars of the cartel: Mayo Zambada Garcia, known as El Mayo, and one of El Chapo's most influential sons, directly involved in the restructuring of the cell after his father's arrest. Javier did not denounce ordinary soldiers. He reached out to the leadership, and the system responded. On December 19th, he was summoned to a meeting in northern Culiacan. The message came through an old contact, someone he had known since his early years, a man with calm speech and a firm tone. They said it was to adjust logistical points, correct a failure in transport communication. Apparently, nothing suspicious. But Javier knew something was wrong. Still, it was maybe out of obligation, maybe out of pride, or maybe because he knew that running away would mean running for the rest of his life. He arrived at the designated location shortly before 7 o'clock at night, a remote site surrounded by dry trees and a dirt road that didn't appear on maps. There were two vehicles parked there, pickup trucks with tinted windows. The place seemed too calm, too silent. When Javier got out of the car, he tried to act natural. He took slow steps, looked around, and approached the entrance to the main house. Before knocking on the door, he heard footsteps behind him, several, quickly, with no chance to react. He was grabbed from behind, thrown to the ground, and forcefully restrained. A dark had covered his face in seconds. All he heard was the sound of his own heart racing and the sharp sound of a gun but hitting his head. When he woke up, he was tied up. His wrists and ankles were bound with wide tape. He was sitting on a rusty chair in a room with a concrete floor and the smell of burning oil. The air was heavy. The room was dark, lit only by a dim light bulb swinging over his head. In front of him, two armed men were watching him, their faces covered, their gaze steady. And between them, something Javier had not expected: a large metal barrel, with black stains on the sides and a lid thrown in the corner. One of the men approached. "You know why you're here," he said quietly. Javier tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. He swallowed hard and fell silent. Another man entered the room, holding a folder. He opened it, took out a few sheets of paper, and placed them on a makeshift table. They were printed documents, screenshots, phone numbers, names, and routes. Everything related to the cartel's latest losses. Everything that had been leaked. The voice continued. "We want to know how far you went, who received it, what you gave. And if you don't answer, you'll be in that barrel with gasoline up to your neck." Javier tried to respond, but the tape on his mouth was pulled back with force just seconds later. He coughed, tried to argue, tried to say that he was pressured, that he had no choice. But no one wanted to hear excuses. They wanted files, flash drives, contact locations, internal data. The men made it clear. If he cooperated, They might let him live. If not, he would be burned on the spot, and no one would know what was left of his body. Fear took over. He hesitated. He cried. His hands shook as he tried to remember each name, each number. He spoke quickly, stumbling over his words, try to gain time, try not to die there, in silence, inside a drum. What he said that night would be enough to start a new phase of the internal war between El Mayo and the Chapitos. But there, in that dirty room, Javier didn't know that. He only knew that for now, the barrel had not been lit, and he was still breathing. Just barely. The metal drum was still in the same place. Javier stared at it as if it were a dark hole about to swallow him. The words he had said the night before still echoed in his mind. In the shed, as if each syllable were a lit thread of gunpowder. He had given out names. He had spoken of recent movements, codes, routes, and even a shipment that was scheduled to cross the Sonora border that same week. With each sentence he uttered, one of the men wrote it down, cross-referenced data, and compared it with internal reports. He didn't know how long he had been there. Time stretched on with no sun, no clock, no window. His body was already aching from being tied up for so long. His back was soaked with sweat, his mouth was dry, his lips were split. But it was the drum that kept him conscious. That dirty barrel, stained with gasoline, positioned in the corner like a silent threat. On the morning of the second day, the interrogators changed. 2 more men arrived, older, colder. Neither of them had any visible weapons, but there was something in their eyes that made the air heavier. One of them spoke without raising his voice. "We have confirmation that at least 2 of the routes you gave have already been intercepted. One of them resulted in 3 deaths. You didn't just give away names. You dug graves." Javier didn't try to deny it. He knew that lying wouldn't save his life. He tried to defend himself by saying that he was under pressure, that he had received threats, that he only wanted to protect his family. But none of that mattered. The 2 men just wanted more. They wanted to know if anyone else knew, if he had passed the data on to other people, if there were copies, and most importantly, if the American authorities were involved. The mood changed completely when one of the interrogators threw a small wooden box onto the table. Inside was a flash drive. It was his. It had been taken from his home the same day he was captured. The folder contained lists of nicknames, numbers, spreadsheets with transfers, and even photos of places used for storing weapons. The men were silent for a few minutes. Then one of them pointed to the drum. "This is where you end up if you don't tell the name of whoever paid you." The barrel wasn't just a threat. Next to it was a canister with the unmistakable smell of fuel. Javier felt his stomach turn. He trembled. He began to talk more. He gave contacts in the north, addresses used as hiding places, nicknames that not even regular soldiers knew. He was sweating, crying, shaking like a cornered, wounded animal. For a moment, the men left the room. The lamplight swayed in the wind that came through an opening in the roof. Javier was breathing heavily. He thought about his mother, who lived a few blocks from where he grew up. He thought about his little daughter, who he barely saw for safety reasons. "I thought I might never see anything like that again." When the interrogators returned, they were carrying a telephone. They said he would make a call. But it wasn't for family or a lawyer. It was to confirm the veracity of what he had said with a trusted contact in the cartel. The call was made on speakerphone. On the other end, a firm voice confirmed 2 names and one of the routes mentioned. It also confirmed that one of the files Javier had handed over was already with DA agents. The room fell silent. The man holding the phone hung up and said, "You've just signed your sentence, but you still get to choose how you die." Javier was no longer crying. He was no longer begging. His voice broke as he tried to ask what would happen to his daughter. The answer was quick. "If she doesn't know anything, there's no need to worry. If she does, she'll disappear with you." For the next few days, he remained locked in the same shed. He was fed only twice. He received no medical attention. He heard no new questions. He could only hear heavy footsteps coming and going, low voices giving orders, men carrying papers and equipment. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a problem being assessed. At one point, he overheard a conversation outside. One of the men said that the damage had already been done, that it was too late to keep quiet without making noise. The other responded that the plan was to hand Javier over alive to the American authorities, but as proof of cooperation, not as an act of compassion. They wanted him to arrive in the United States destroyed, physically and psychologically, to show the government that the cartel's still in control, even of its informants. Javier would be a symbol, a body that speaks, but doesn't forget the barrel. On the 5th day, he was removed from the chair. The tapes were cut with a knife, and for the first time he was allowed to stand. He could barely stand. 2 men grabbed him by the arms and led him to a dark pickup truck. His eyes were covered. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew it was the end. Next to the back seat, he heard someone comment, "We'll deliver it, but first, we'll make sure to show that we're in charge. They can deal with it however they want afterwards." The car drove off in silence. Javier Galindo, the man who delivered names that were worth more than lives, was on his way to American hands. But before he crossed any border, he had left behind what was left of his own soul. The journey to the border took more than 8 hours. Javier Galindo was in the back seat of an old pickup truck, his hands restrained in steel handcuffs and his face covered by a cloth. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but from the smell of dust, the rocking of the road, and the muffled sound of the tires against the earth, he understood that they were moving away from the urban centers. There was no conversation among the men escorting him, only silence, deep breaths, and the occasional crackle of the radio. When they finally stopped, he heard voices in English. He was dragged from the car with force, thrown to the ground, and had the cloth ripped from his face. He was in the middle of nowhere, an open clearing between hills, surrounded by dry grass and transmission towers. In front of him, armed men in dark uniforms and tactical shields. United States agents. On the Mexican side, the men who brought him handed him over without saying a word. One of them simply threw a small bag with documents, printed files, and a flash drive on the ground, all stained with dried blood. When the American agents picked him up, the scene looked more like a handover than a capture, and that was exactly what it was. A strategic, calculated handover, made by the cartel not out of regret, but out of convenience. Javier was taken to El Paso, Texas, where he was immediately placed into federal custody. His body was covered in bruises, with fractured ribs, injuries to his hands and feet, and visible signs of dehydration and physical torture. Doctors who attended to him confirmed that he had been kept in degrading conditions for several days. But what caught the most attention was not the state of the body. It was the look. Javier didn't blink much. He spoke little, and he repeated only one phrase. "If I say more, they'll find me." Even here, the Americans knew the value of what they had. A whistleblower from directly within the Sinaloa Cartel, with verified information, access to routes, the names of mid-level commanders, and even financial records. He was immediately placed in a protection program, under maximum surveillance, and taken to a secret location far from the border. But the damage had already been done. Hours after the delivery, a video began to circulate in closed groups in Mexico. It was short, 2.5 minutes, recorded in low quality inside the warehouse where Javier had been kept. In the video, he appears tied to a chair, with his head down and blood on his face. Next to him, a partially empty metal drum, with gasoline in the bottom. The image cuts before any direct violence, but the message was clear. The caption read, "This is how he who talks too much ends up." The video spread like wildfire. It was shared among members of rival cartels, police officers, journalists, and even civilians who were unaware of the context. In less than 24 hours, Javier Galindo's name was on every screen. Some called him a traitor, others a coward. But for Sinaloa's leadership, he was becoming a bigger problem than any security operation. The reaction came quickly. Within the cartel itself, the decision to hand over Javier was divisive. One group, linked to El Mayo, considered the move a strategic failure. They said he should have been eliminated discreetly without exposure. Another group, linked to the Chapitos, saw the handover as a powerful move, a way of showing the U.S. government that there was an opening for dialogue, as long as it was on their terms. These two views clashed. In January 2025, less than a month after the handover, internal attacks began. Executioners loyal to El Mayo were found dead in ambushes. Warehouses belonging to the Chapitos faction were set on fire. A middle boss was kidnapped and found decapitated in Hermosillo with a note that read, "For every traitor handed over, a head lost." War was declared. What was once a unified cartel had now splintered into armed cells driven by revenge, control, and survival. Routes were vulnerable. Shipments were intercepted. And through it all, Javier's name still lingered, like a living ghost that haunted the decisions of both sides. The United States, for its part, remained silent. It did not confirm where he was or whether he was alive. But anonymous sources indicated that he made a deal in exchange for permanent protection, handing over more than 50 names, along with digital evidence and records of financial transactions. What he said during the first few days after the handover was never revealed to the public, but it was enough to provoke a war. Within the cartel, many began to suspect that he had fabricated some of the information. Others believed that he had merely confirmed what the government already knew. But for those loyal to El Mayo, Javier Galindo became the symbol of the breakdown of trust, the pulled thread that unraveled the structure that had taken decades to hold together. The video of the drum is still circulating, now with edited sections, highlighted phrases, and the image of Javier with his face bruised, looking at the ground. For some, a warning. For others, a reminder. For the cartel, a mistake that should never have left the warehouse alive. And even outside Mexico, surrounded by guards and thick walls, Javier knows the real trial is yet to take place. Because in the world he lived in, no one cheats and sleeps in peace. And if the past finds you first, there will be no protection that can save you